When you begin to notice the stream of thoughts running through your mind, something subtle but undeniable happens. You see, often for the first time, that these thoughts arrive on their own. They come in as statements, conclusions, judgments, predictions, and opinions you never consciously asked for. You might be washing a dish, scrolling your phone, or sitting in silence, and suddenly a sentence appears in your head. You didn't decide to think it. You simply became aware that it had already formed. This simple noticing is the point where the identity you've lived with for years begins to loosen. Because if you didn't choose the thought, what exactly makes it yours? Look closely at your experience right now. The next thought that shows up, examine it without engaging with the story it brings. Where did it come from? Did you summon it? Did you plan it? Or did you only realize it was present once it had already arrived? This is the beginning of a fracture in the automatic assumption that thinking equals self. You start to sense that the voice in your mind behaves more like a process happening through you rather than something you inherently are. There is a quiet shock in recognizing this. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. More like a tension pulling against something you never questioned. For as long as you can remember, thoughts and identity were fused. You thought because you believed the thinking was you. You believed the thinking was coming from your essence, your personality, your character, your choices. But when you observe the mind clearly, without trying to modify it or control it, a different picture forms. You start noticing how thoughts appear automatically, one after another, following patterns you never designed consciously. A thought about the past appears. A worry about the future appears. A judgment about someone you barely interacted with appears. Even the thought about whether this realization makes sense appears. None of them required your permission. They simply arose, and then you noticed them. That sequence alone begins dissolving the certainty that you are the creator of them. And this is where the destabilization truly begins, the moment you acknowledge that thoughts are events you witness rather than events you initiate. You are aware of them in the same way you are aware of external sounds, sensations, or images. They arise. You perceive them. That's the entire mechanism. But because this mechanism operated unnoticed your entire life, it shaped your sense of self without resistance. You believed the content because you believed the source was you. Once that assumption cracks, the relationship with the mind changes permanently. Nothing dramatic has to happen. No grand realization. The shift occurs in the smallest opening. You notice a thought. You notice you didn't choose it. You notice it passes whether you cling to it or not. This is the moment the default identity begins to separate from its foundation. This is the precise point where awareness starts to be seen as distinct from the thinking process. And once that distinction is recognized, even slightly, everything that follows will begin to unravel in ways that cannot be undone. There's a moment when you start paying attention closely enough to realize something unsettling. By the time you notice a thought, the brain has already produced it. You don't witness the creation of the thought itself. You only witness the after effect, the echo. For years this detail goes unnoticed because the sequence feels instantaneous. A thought appears, and you assume you made it. You assume the appearance and the awareness happen together. But when you slow down and observe the timing, you see a gap. The thought is formed. Then you become aware of it. Awareness isn't the generator. It's the one that arrives late. This is not speculation. It's one of the quiet truths modern neuroscience stumbled into while studying voluntary action. Researchers watched the brain show signs of activity before the subject reported deciding anything. The impulse began in the brain, and only afterward did the conscious mind claim ownership. A similar delay shows up in thinking. The machinery fires first. The awareness notices second. And for the first time, the belief that, I am the thinker, begins to loosen. Look at your own experience right now. The next thought that shows up, notice how it was already present by the time you realized you were thinking. You didn't see its beginning. You didn't watch it form. You only caught it midstream, like walking into a room where a conversation is already happening. You become aware of something that has already begun without you. And yet your entire life you've assumed that awareness is the author. When you understand this, a fundamental assumption begins to dissolve. The assumption that thinking originates from the self. Instead, the mind behaves like a predictive system constantly firing signals, processing fragments of memory, expectation, environment, and emotion. Those signals appear in consciousness only after they've been shaped. By the time you meet the thought, the work is done. You're not creating it. You're receiving it. This is where the belief that thought equals identity starts to crack. Because if the thought is not consciously produced by you, why would it define you? Why claim ownership of something you didn't initiate? Why feel guilty, ashamed, afraid, or convinced by mental content that didn't come from any deliberate intention? You don't blame yourself for a sound that enters your ears. You don't identify with a smell that drifts past you. Thoughts follow the same pattern. They arise. They are detected. They pass. But because the detection happens internally rather than through the senses, you've assumed the source must be internal as well. Once you see the sequence clearly, the illusion that the mind's activity is your identity begins to lose strength. Awareness isn't generating thought. Awareness is witnessing neural activity after it happens. And if awareness is the witness rather than the author, then the witnessing self is free from whatever the mind produces. You don't need to resist thoughts or replace them or judge them. You only need to see the timing. That single detail changes the entire relationship between you and the mind. Once you understand that thoughts appear before you arrive to observe them, the belief that they define who you are no longer holds. There is a point in this process when you stop trying to manage your thoughts and simply watch them. Not analyze them. Not replace them. Just observe the raw movement of the mind as it happens. And when you do, something becomes unmistakably clear: the thoughts appear on their own. They rise, they shift, they fade, and not once do they ask for your approval. You don't invite them in. You don't authorize them. You only notice them after they've already entered consciousness. That simple act of watching interrupts the lifelong habit of assuming ownership. As you keep observing, you might notice the mind producing thoughts that contradict each other. One moment, a thought tells you everything is fine. The next moment, another thought insists something is wrong. If these thoughts were truly you, they wouldn't argue with each other. They wouldn't appear as conflicting impulses. They would reflect a single, cohesive identity. But when you see the inconsistency, the automatic nature becomes obvious. These thoughts are patterns, remnants, impulses. None of them have to define you unless you fuse with them. What happens next is subtle but powerful. The awareness that's watching becomes more distinct. You start recognizing that the observer is steady while the thoughts are constantly changing. The thoughts move. The awareness does not. The thoughts fluctuate through memory, fear, expectation, and imagination. The awareness simply notices. And the moment you feel the difference between those two, identification starts to loosen. You begin to experience yourself not as the content of the mind, but as the space in which the content appears. Try noticing the next thought that comes through. Don't try to modify it or judge it. Just look at how it shows up without effort. Look at how it disappears without effort. You don't push it in. You don't push it out. It rises and falls by itself. And when you truly see that, something inside you steps back. You become the witness rather than the thinker. This is the first detachment, and it changes everything that follows. For many people, this is the moment something clicks. They see their mind producing commentary they didn't ask for. They notice how the thoughts don't reflect who they are but simply pass through like weather. And often, this realization feels personal. It lands differently for everyone. So if something in this part of the process stood out for you, or if you noticed a moment where the separation became clear, share that in the comments. Sometimes hearing how it unfolds for others helps clarify what you're noticing in yourself. What matters most in this stage is recognizing the distinction. You are the one who sees the thought, not the thought itself. You are the awareness that remains when every mental story dissolves. Once this separation becomes visible, even briefly, the automatic grip of identification loses strength. You can watch the mind without becoming tangled in it. You can hear the inner voice without mistaking it for your own. This quiet step back is the doorway into everything that comes next. Set a timer in your mind for 60 seconds. During that time, try not to think. Do not replace thoughts. Do not suppress them. Simply attempt not to have a single one. Within moments, the truth becomes obvious. A thought appears. Then another one. Then a chain of them. Some feel random. Some feel familiar. Some feel like commentary about the experiment itself. And even if you catch a brief second of quiet, the next thought arrives on its own schedule. You notice it only once it is already present. This short exercise, simple as it seems, exposes something most people spend their entire lives overlooking: you are not the one producing your thoughts. In those 60 seconds, you experience the mind without the usual distractions. You watch it instead of moving with it. And when you try to stop it, the automatic nature becomes undeniable. Thoughts continue not because you want them, and not because you chose them, but because the mind operates on its own momentum. This is what breaks the illusion of control. You can no more stop a thought from arising than you can stop a sound from entering your ears. The arising is automatic. Your awareness comes after. Most people have never slowed down enough to see this directly. They believe they are steering the mind because they never attempted to interrupt it consciously. But when you do, even for a moment, you meet something revealing. You can decide not to follow a thought, but you cannot decide not to have one. You can resist its story, but you cannot prevent its appearance. The mind moves the way weather moves. Thoughts come in, pass through, and fade out. You are the witness, not the generator. As the experiment continues, the thoughts that show up tend to fall into patterns. Planning. Remembering. Commenting. Judging. Predicting. Narrating the moment you are in. These patterns appear even while you are trying to remain silent. And because they appear without your permission, the idea that you are the one creating them begins to feel less convincing. You start to see the mind as something happening rather than something you're doing. If you repeat the experiment again, you may feel a moment where the mind goes quiet for a breath or two. But even that quiet happens on its own. You didn't cause it. You only noticed it. And then, as always, another thought arrives. The cycle resumes. What this shows you is not failure. It shows you how the system actually works. You can observe the mind. You can understand the mind. But you cannot control its arising. And once this is seen clearly, the belief that thinking reflects your identity begins to dissolve. This short attempt not to think is not meant to change your mind. It's meant to reveal it. Watching the automatic flow breaks the assumption that thought equals self. It shows you that the mind has its own rhythm, its own impulses, its own momentum. And as you watch that momentum unfold without your involvement, the separation between awareness and thought becomes undeniable. Once you've seen that thoughts arise on their own, another layer of your experience becomes visible. You begin noticing something that has always been present but rarely acknowledged. There is a silent witness inside you, watching the movement of the mind without participating in it. This observer doesn't generate the thoughts. It doesn't modify them. It simply notices them. And the more clearly you see the automatic nature of thinking, the more obvious this witnessing presence becomes. Watch the next thought that appears. Notice how it shows up without effort. Notice that by the time you're aware of it, it has already formed. Now shift your attention slightly, not to the content of the thought, but to the part of you that is aware of it. That awareness is steady. It doesn't rush. It doesn't react unless you lean into the thought. It doesn't speak. It doesn't interrupt. It just sees. It is the same awareness that noticed the last thought, and the one before that. The thoughts change. The awareness stays the same. This difference is crucial. The thought might be anxious, hopeful, irritated, bored, or neutral. But the awareness observing it remains unaffected by its tone. You can experience a chaotic stream of mental activity, yet the observer remains calm, clear, and unchanged. The mind may fluctuate moment by moment, but the awareness behind it does not. That alone tells you these two are not the same thing. If you pay attention further, you'll notice that the thoughts appear within the awareness, not the other way around. Thoughts are events occurring inside a larger field of perception. Sounds, sensations, memories, and images all arise in the same space. And the one who notices them is not defined by any single event. This is why a thought can appear, and disappear, and the awareness is still here. It is the background you rarely look at, the quiet presence that has been watching since early childhood. What becomes clear after this recognition is that you don't have to fight your thoughts. You don't have to argue with them or push them away. They are not instructions. They are not truths. They are not reflections of your identity. They are movements in the mind. The observer simply sees these movements and allows them to pass. Just as you watch clouds drift across the sky without feeling responsible for their shape, you can begin watching thoughts drift across awareness without feeling responsible for their content. The emergence of this observer is not a new creation. It's a noticing of something you've overlooked. You were always the awareness behind the thoughts, but identification kept the focus on the mental stories instead of the one perceiving them. When the observer becomes clear, a shift occurs. You stop trying to control every mental event because you recognize you were never the one creating them. You see the distinction between the flow of thought and the one who quietly witnesses that flow. Once this distinction lands, the grip of the mind begins to loosen. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer pull you in automatically. You feel a small space between awareness and thinking, a soft distance that wasn't there before. This is the watcher beginning to stand on its own. When you mistake a thought for yourself, it quietly becomes the lens through which you interpret everything. A single judgment can alter the way you walk into a room. A single memory can shape the way you speak to someone you care about. A single fear can influence decisions you don't even realize you're making. Identification turns every passing mental event into a personal truth, and because it happens so subtly, most people never question the impact it has accumulated over years. Think about the last time a thought told you something negative about your future or your worth. The moment you believed it, your body reacted. Your chest tightened. Your breath shortened. Your mood shifted. Nothing external had changed, yet your emotional state reorganized itself around a sentence that appeared in your mind without your permission. This is what identification does. It fuses your sense of self to whatever the mind produces. The thought might last only seconds, but the emotional residue can linger for hours. Identification also distorts perception. When a thought declares that someone is judging you, you start scanning for evidence. You analyze tone, expression, pauses, and the smallest details, even if the thought itself was inaccurate. The mind creates a story, and perception bends around it. You see the world through the filter of the thoughts you fuse with, not through what is actually happening. And because the mind pulls from past experiences, many of these filters were formed long before the moment you're living now. Some thoughts aren't even yours in origin. They were absorbed from parents, teachers, culture, or the environment you grew up in. Yet once you identify with them, they dictate your reactions as if they were native. You find yourself repeating patterns you never consciously chose. You carry beliefs that don't fit who you are now. The mind plays old recordings, and identification turns those recordings into present-day identity. This is why emotional reactivity feels so immediate. A thought appears, you believe it, and your nervous system responds as if the thought is an objective reality. You may feel threatened, insecure, angry, guilty, or ashamed, even when nothing outside of your mind has occurred. The internal narrative becomes the trigger. The story becomes the experience. If you look closely, you might recognize this dynamic in your own life. You might see how a single thought has shaped entire behaviors or influenced choices you didn't intend to make. And if you felt the weight of that, or noticed how often your mood has been dictated by the mind's automatic content, that recognition alone is powerful. If this part resonates with you, or if you've seen this mechanism playing out in ways you didn't notice before, tap the like button so this message reaches more people who might need to hear it. What matters here is understanding the cost of identification. When you believe a thought is you, it gains authority. It drives your reactions. It colors your perception. It shapes your life. But when the separation becomes visible, when you see that you are the observer of the thought, not the thought itself, the authority fades. You start responding to life instead of reacting to the mind. The stories lose their grip. And for the first time, you begin to experience yourself without the inherited narratives that once defined you. When you look closely at how the mind actually works, you start seeing that thoughts are not reflections of what is happening right now. They are predictions. The brain is constantly trying to guess what will happen next based on everything it has seen before. It retrieves patterns, compares them to the present moment, and generates thoughts as projections. This happens so quickly and automatically that the predictions feel like truth. But they are not truth. They are assumptions built from past data. Your mind doesn't wait for reality to fully reveal itself. It fills in the gaps before anything unfolds. It anticipates tone in someone's voice, meaning behind a look, outcomes of situations that haven't even taken shape. And because these predictions appear as thoughts, you've likely spent most of your life mistaking them for accurate interpretations. But when you step back, you notice how often they are wrong. The mind imagines danger that never comes. It anticipates conflict that never happens. It judges situations using outdated information. The thought is not describing the moment. It is guessing. This predictive mechanism is not a flaw. It is how the brain ensures survival. It assumes, calculates, and estimates constantly. If a certain pattern once meant danger, the mind will predict danger again even when the environment has changed. The thought appears as a warning, but the warning is often meant for a version of you that no longer exists. When you recognize this, the authority of thought begins to weaken. You start to see mental content as guesses rather than guidance. Consider how often the mind tells you what someone else thinks about you. It is not reading their mind. It is projecting based on memories of past interactions, old insecurities, or learned expectations. Or think about how the mind tells you something will go wrong before you even act. That is not intuition. That is predictive coding pulling information from the archive of previous experiences. And because the thought feels immediate, you interpret it as truth rather than possibility. This is why the mind often misrepresents the present moment. It does not see what is in front of you clearly. It sees fragments from the past layered onto the present. When you begin to watch this mechanism instead of merging with it, you realize how much of your life has been shaped by predictions rather than reality. You see how often your reactions came from old patterns rather than what was actually happening. This recognition softens the grip of thought because you no longer rely on it as a trustworthy narrator. You might notice this in subtle moments. A stranger's expression triggers worry because it resembles something familiar. A new opportunity triggers doubt because the mind retrieves memories of past failures. None of these thoughts are about the current moment. They are echoes of what once was, projected forward automatically. When you understand the mind as a prediction machine, you begin to take its content less personally. You stop assuming every thought is meaningful. You stop treating every mental image as instruction. You start meeting the present moment directly rather than through layers of interpretation. And in that gap, where awareness sees the pattern for what it is, the mind begins to lose its influence. When a thought appears, it often feels new. It feels like it belongs to this moment, formed in response to what is happening right now. But when you look closer, you start to see that most thoughts are not created from the present. They are echoes from the past, resurfacing in slightly altered forms. The mind pulls from old experiences, old emotions, old fears, and old interpretations, then presents them as if they are current insights. They are not. They are repetitions wearing a fresh disguise. Think about how the mind responds when you enter a situation that resembles something you've been through before. The thoughts that arise aren't shaped by the present environment. They're shaped by what happened last time. If you were criticized once, the mind anticipates criticism again. If you were disappointed before, the mind expects disappointment now. Even if the people are different, even if the circumstances have changed, the internal narrative replays the old pattern. The emotional tone of the past bleeds into the present moment through thoughts that sound immediate but originate from long-formed associations. These recycled thoughts often carry a sense of urgency or certainty, not because they are accurate, but because they have been rehearsed many times. Familiarity makes them feel true. Repetition makes them feel reliable. Yet they are simply old interpretations resurfacing whenever the mind detects a similar pattern. The brain is not responding to what is happening. It is responding to what it remembers. You may notice this in small moments. You misinterpret someone's silence as disapproval because once, silence meant disapproval. You hesitate before an opportunity because an opportunity once led to failure. You assume someone's tone is directed at you because a similar tone once carried judgment. All of these reactions appear as fresh thoughts, but none of them originated from the present moment. They are echoes replaying themselves, shaped by memory rather than reality. Even positive thoughts follow this pattern. A moment that resembles a comforting memory triggers reassurance. A familiar setting brings ease. The mind retrieves past experiences and overlays them on the now. This mechanism is automatic, but it also reveals how little of your thinking is genuinely about what is unfolding in front of you. Most of it is about what has already happened. When you begin observing thoughts carefully, you start recognizing these echoes. A sentence arises in your mind, and you can trace its emotional tone back to a past event. A judgment appears, and you realize it matches an old belief formed years ago. You see that the thought feels immediate only because it is being replayed inside a moment that carries a similar shape. The mind is retrieving old files and labeling them as current perception. Seeing this clearly has a profound effect. You stop taking thoughts at face value. You stop assuming they reflect truth. You begin questioning whether the thought belongs to the present or to a memory resurfacing. And in that pause, the relationship with your inner world shifts. You become less reactive, because you understand the thought is not describing what is happening now. It is describing what happened then. This recognition loosens the grip of old narratives. It allows you to meet the present moment without being overshadowed by the past. And once you see the recycling mechanism for what it is, the mind begins losing its ability to convince you that memory is reality. When a thought repeats itself often enough, it gains a sense of authority. It feels important simply because it has been rehearsed. But the repetition doesn't make it true. It only makes it familiar. One of the most revealing things you can do is follow a recurring thought back to where it began. Not to analyze it or argue with it, but to see its origin clearly. When you trace it to its source, you often find it was formed in a moment that no longer has anything to do with your life now. Start with a thought that shows up frequently. It might be a fear about failure, a belief about your worth, or a judgment about how others see you. Instead of reacting to it, pause and ask a simple question: when was the first time I remember feeling something like this? You'll notice the mind begins retrieving old moments. A memory surfaces. An interaction. A comment from someone. An experience that left an impression. The present-day thought is usually just a modern version of that old emotional imprint. The mind builds these imprints through associations. A moment that carried emotional weight becomes a reference point. Whenever something in your current environment resembles that old moment, even slightly, the mind retrieves the same thought pattern. It doesn't check whether the circumstances have changed. It doesn't evaluate whether you've grown since then. It simply brings back the old conclusion. That conclusion appears as a new thought, but once you trace it back, you recognize its age. You see how outdated it is. And when you see its age, its influence weakens. Often the origin of a recurring thought is surprisingly trivial. A single comment from childhood. A moment when you felt embarrassed. A situation where you misunderstood someone's tone. The mind took that event, attached meaning to it, and filed it away as a template for future situations. This template becomes the source of thoughts that seem automatic and self-generated. But when you trace them back, their relevance dissolves. You realize the present moment is being shaped by an interpretation formed years ago, sometimes decades ago. When you follow the thread far enough, you start recognizing that many of your recurring thoughts were never consciously chosen. They weren't conclusions you arrived at through reflection. They were reactions formed by a younger version of you, during a time when you didn't have the understanding you have now. The mind simply kept them because repetition made them efficient. It uses the old interpretation as a shortcut. By seeing the origin, you break the illusion that the thought is meaningful right now. It becomes clear that the thought isn't responding to your present reality but replaying information stored in memory. This recognition creates distance. Instead of believing the thought, you recognize it as a recycled signal. Instead of reacting, you observe. Source tracking doesn't require you to fix anything. It only requires honesty. Where did this come from? When did I first feel this? Does it apply to the life I'm living today? When the thought is exposed as a relic of the past, its power dissolves. You stop treating it as truth and start seeing it as old data. And the moment you recognize old data as old, it loses the ability to define you. When you look at the movement of your inner world carefully, you start to see that the content of a thought matters far less than the place you're viewing it from. Two people can have the same thought and create entirely different emotional outcomes. What makes the difference is identification. When you believe a thought is you, its emotional charge amplifies. When you see it as something happening within awareness, its intensity weakens. Identification is the signal the body listens to, not the words themselves. A thought about failure, for example, has no real power on its own. It is a string of mental images and predictions. But if you identify with it, the body reacts as if the scenario is happening now. Your breath changes. Your posture tightens. Your attention narrows. The emotional broadcast begins immediately. The thought didn't create the shift. Your fusion with it did. You absorbed the meaning, assumed it belonged to you, and the identification generated the emotional frequency. This is why some thoughts pass through quietly while others take hold. The mind offers content, but identification selects what becomes your lived experience. You can hear a dozen neutral thoughts without reacting, but the moment one matches an old identity, the intensity changes. Identification acts like a tuner. It pulls certain thoughts into emotional focus and lets others fade. When the tuner locks onto a thought, the emotional frequency strengthens. You might think the emotional broadcast comes from the thought itself, but it actually comes from the sense of, this is me. A thought becomes a signal when you internalize it. If you watch the same thought without identifying, it loses its force. You still notice it, but the emotional charge doesn't activate because the link between thought and self isn't formed. The content hasn't changed. The identification has. This distinction reveals why your internal state can fluctuate so sharply. The mind produces thoughts constantly, yet only a fraction of them alter your mood. The ones that do are the ones you absorb as truth about yourself, your future, or your worth. Identification transforms mental noise into emotional reality. Even positive thoughts follow this pattern. A thought that aligns with a desired identity feels strong, uplifting, or affirming. Again, it's not the content alone. It's your attachment to what the thought represents. You merge with the idea, and the emotional broadcast reflects that merger. The signal becomes coherent when identification is stable, and scattered when identification shifts from moment to moment. When you begin observing thoughts without fusing with them, the emotional broadcast becomes softer. Not numb, not detached, just clearer. You notice the rise and fall of thoughts without being pulled in by every one. The tuner loosens. The mind generates content, but the sense of self stops attaching to each piece. Emotional coherence comes from this shift, not from controlling the thought stream. Once you see that identification shapes the signal far more than thought content, the grip of the mind loosens. You stop trying to fix every thought and begin noticing the moment you attach to it. And in that noticing, the signal changes on its own. Your emotional state doesn't stay contained inside your body. It broadcasts outward in ways most people never pay attention to. The heart generates an electromagnetic field that extends several feet beyond the body, and this field shifts depending on what you're feeling. Calm, coherence, anxiety, frustration, openness, tension, each creates a measurable pattern. These patterns interact with the environment, not through anything mystical, but through the simple fact that other people's nervous systems are continuously reading signals, adjusting, and responding. You've felt this before. You walk into a room where someone is tense, and you sense it before they speak. You sit with someone who is deeply calm, and your own breathing begins to slow. No words are exchanged, yet something internal reorganizes. This is the feedback loop in action. Your emotional field broadcasts a signal, and the people around you unconsciously adjust to it. Their reactions then feed back into your experience, confirming or challenging the emotional state you began with. When your internal state is coherent, when awareness is steady and the emotional system isn't pulled in every direction, your field sends out a stable pattern. Others feel it as steadiness. Conversations become smoother. Situations de-escalate more easily. People interpret your presence differently because their nervous system is responding to what yours is broadcasting. None of this requires effort. It's the natural alignment that occurs when your internal signal is consistent. When the internal state is fragmented, the broadcast becomes fragmented too. If you're anxious or reactive, people feel that before you say anything. They respond with caution or distance, which you interpret as confirmation that something is wrong. The feedback loop amplifies whatever signal you start with. Even neutral situations can feel charged because the emotional field entering them is already unsettled. It's not reality pushing back. It's your broadcast shaping the interaction before the interaction even begins. This doesn't mean you must maintain perfect calm. It means the emotional environment you carry influences the outcomes you experience. Not because you're manifesting events through thought, but because your body is constantly communicating through signals that others naturally pick up. Your emotional pattern shifts their responses, and their responses influence your perception of reality. When you're aware of this loop, you begin noticing small moments where your state alters a situation immediately. A conversation that could have escalated softens when your field steadies. A person who seemed closed off becomes more open when your internal tension eases. Even practical outcomes shift, not through force, but through the ease that comes from interacting with the environment in a regulated state. None of this depends on controlling thoughts. It depends on the degree of identification behind them. When you're not fused with every mental event, your emotional system stabilizes. That stability changes the broadcast, and the broadcast changes the feedback you receive from the world. The loop becomes self-supporting instead of self-amplifying in negative directions. And the more you see this in real time, the more you understand that your internal state is not separate from your external experience. Manifestation doesn't fail because the intention is weak. It fails because the emotional broadcast underneath the intention is louder, older, and far more consistent. When someone tries to shift their life through conscious effort alone, they usually focus on thoughts. They repeat affirmations, visualize outcomes, or try to project certainty. But none of that overrides the emotional signals that have been firing for years, sometimes decades. These signals become the dominant broadcast, shaping interactions, perceptions, and responses long before the conscious mind attempts to direct anything. Every emotion carries a pattern. Anxiety broadcasts vigilance. Shame broadcasts withdrawal. Fear broadcasts avoidance. These patterns are not subtle. They influence tone of voice, facial expression, posture, decisions, and the microsignals that other people read instantly. Even without understanding why, others respond to the broadcast you're sending. A confident intention layered on top of fear creates mixed messaging. People sense one thing while you attempt to project another, and the result is confusion in both directions. In the internal environment, contradictions are even more disruptive. When intention says one thing but identification says another, the mind fragments. You can think about abundance while broadcasting scarcity through tension, worry, and anticipation of loss. You can think about confidence while broadcasting self-doubt through shrinking posture and hesitancy. The conscious thought becomes the quiet layer, the unconscious pattern becomes the volume that reality responds to. This doesn't imply the universe is judging emotional states. It means the outcomes you experience are shaped by the behavioral and perceptual patterns arising from those states. When an unconscious broadcast dominates, it filters perception in a way that confirms itself. Someone broadcasting fear notices only the risks. Someone broadcasting inadequacy interprets neutral feedback as rejection. Someone broadcasting scarcity overlooks opportunities because vigilance keeps attention on what's missing rather than what's available. The outer world ends up mirroring the inner broadcast, not because intention is ignored, but because intention never had a chance to override the older pattern. Another issue is consistency. Conscious intention is usually brief, practiced a few minutes a day or only when remembered. Unconscious broadcast runs continuously. It shapes how you wake up, how you speak, how you respond under pressure, and how you interpret other people's behavior. Frequency always wins over occasional focus. A single moment of clarity cannot undo a constant emotional signal rooted in identification. When people say manifestation doesn't work, they're often describing this conflict between two internal systems. One system is trying to move forward through deliberate thought. The other is pulling everything back toward familiar emotional patterns because they feel like home. The broadcast tied to identity is always stronger than the one tied to desire. Seeing this dynamic doesn't discourage change. It explains it. When the unconscious broadcast becomes visible, it loses authority. Awareness interrupts repetition. And the moment the emotional signal shifts, even slightly, the external feedback begins to shift with it. Most people assume their thoughts are shaped by personal experience, but a large portion of what passes through the mind didn't originate in their own life at all. Thoughts often reflect collective narratives absorbed through culture, family systems, media, and the emotional climate of the environments you've lived in. These narratives become mental wallpaper, always present, rarely questioned, and almost never recognized as external material that seeped into the internal space. Consider how early in life the mind begins taking in signals about danger, success, failure, identity, and worth. A child absorbs anxieties that belong to parents, not to themselves. A household shaped by scarcity teaches a sense of lack that becomes automatic, even if the child never directly experienced deprivation. Cultural stories about what is admirable or shameful become internal commentary long before someone has a chance to evaluate whether those standards apply to them. By the time a person reaches adulthood, much of their mental activity is made up of inherited conclusions rather than lived observations. Collective fear is especially contagious. When enough people worry about uncertainty, instability, or imagine threats, that emotional tone circulates through conversations, media, and group behavior. The mind picks up these signals and begins generating thoughts that match the frequency. You might find yourself worrying about situations that have nothing to do with your actual circumstances, simply because the collective field has normalized a certain kind of anxiety. The thought appears internally, so it feels personal, but it isn't. It's a reflection of shared emotional atmosphere. The same happens with collective beliefs. Ideas about aging, success timelines, relationship expectations, or the definition of achievement often come from societal narratives rather than personal truth. These beliefs shape thought patterns that operate silently in the background. Someone may feel behind in life, not because their reality indicates that, but because they absorbed cultural timelines that never accounted for individual paths. The mind repeats these timelines because repetition feels familiar, and familiarity is often mistaken for truth. Even the emotional tone of a physical environment influences thought. Crowded cities carry a different emotional field than quiet rural areas. Homes marked by conflict create mental patterns that persist long after someone leaves. Workplaces filled with tension amplify vigilance and self-doubt, while supportive environments soften internal chatter. The mind responds to whatever field it's immersed in, generating thoughts that match it, even if the content has no real connection to personal experience. Because these influences are subtle, they go unnoticed. A person assumes the thought is theirs simply because it arose in their own mind. But the mind is porous. It picks up signals, processes emotional cues, and mirrors the narratives around it. Recognizing this dissolves the assumption that every thought is personal or meaningful. It reveals how much of the internal dialogue is recycled noise from sources that never asked for permission to enter. Seeing this clearly is liberating. It interrupts the habit of taking every mental event seriously and opens the possibility that many thoughts can be released without analysis because they were never truly yours to begin with. Thoughts feel like a single stream, but when examined closely, they divide into three distinct categories that reveal just how little of your mental activity belongs to the present moment. The first category is direct experience. These thoughts arise from what is happening right now, sensory input, immediate observations, or practical responses to the environment. They are sparse, simple, and functional. When you reach for a glass of water, the mind notes the movement. When you hear a sound, it registers. Direct experience thoughts tend to be clean and brief because they serve the purpose of navigating the moment as it unfolds. The second category is personal history. These thoughts are filtered through memories, past interpretations, and emotional imprints. They color the present with echoes from another time. A neutral comment might trigger defensiveness not because of what was said, but because of a past experience that the mind uses as a template. Personal history thoughts create narratives and expectations based on what you've lived, assuming the future will mirror the past. They speak in patterns: this always happens, I know how people are, I should avoid this. They feel familiar because they originated from lived moments, but they rarely reflect what is genuinely happening now. The third category is collective field thoughts. These come from the emotional and conceptual atmosphere you exist in, society, culture, family systems, and shared fears or aspirations. They can enter the mind without any personal experience behind them. You may worry about downturns, failures, or expectations that have nothing to do with your actual life. You may carry beliefs about timing, worth, or identity that were never questioned because they are culturally normal. These thoughts can be so widespread that they feel like objective truth, but they are simply reflections of the dominant narratives circulating in the collective environment. When you observe your mind carefully, you notice how small the first category truly is. Most thoughts are not grounded in the immediate moment. Instead, they are recycled interpretations from your past or absorbed stories from the collective field. The mind spends far more time predicting, remembering, and echoing inherited narratives than responding to what is right in front of you. This is why thoughts can feel disconnected from experience, because they often are. Recognizing these categories changes your relationship with your inner world. It becomes clear that the majority of thought activity doesn't arise from present truth. If a thought belongs to personal history, it carries emotional residues that may no longer be relevant. If it belongs to the collective field, it may not reflect your own values or circumstances at all. By seeing each thought through this lens, you stop assuming every mental event deserves attention or belief. This shift doesn't silence the mind, but it reveals the structure behind its activity. You begin to understand that only a small fraction of thoughts reflect the present moment, and those are the ones that require the least interpretation. The rest can be noticed without being lived through, loosening the grip of unconscious identification. Most people don't realize how loud the collective field is until they finally step out of it. The mind becomes so used to absorbing the tone of the environment, its concerns, its priorities, its anxieties, that it mistakes that noise for its own internal voice. When you begin tuning out the collective field, the first thing you notice is how much of your thinking was simply a reflection of everything around you. Not original. Not personal. Just absorbed. The collective field speaks through repetition. You hear the same themes echoed through conversations, headlines, family dialogue, and cultural expectations. Over time, these repeated signals compress into mental habits. You start worrying about things you never truly cared about. You chase goals you never consciously chose. You feel pressure you can't trace back to any specific event in your life. Tuning out the field begins with recognizing this subtle infiltration. Disengagement doesn't require removing yourself from society or isolating from people. It starts internally, with a quiet refusal to automatically adopt the tone of the environment. You begin watching how your mind responds to group emotions, noticing when anxiety spikes simply because everyone around you is tense, or when self-doubt rises because comparison has been normalized. By observing these fluctuations without participating in them, you weaken their influence. As you distance yourself from the collective narrative, the mental noise begins to thin. Thoughts that once felt urgent now appear hollow. Fears that seemed universally valid reveal themselves as borrowed, not lived. The mind becomes less reactive and more spacious. You begin to sense the difference between what is arising from genuine perception and what is simply echoing cultural patterns. This subtle shift creates a feeling of clarity that isn't produced by effort, it emerges naturally when external noise loses its grip. The more you tune out, the more apparent it becomes that the collective field operates on momentum. It moves fast, demands attention, and rewards conformity. When you stop feeding it with your identification, it can no longer use your mind as a channel. The internal space that opens up feels unfamiliar at first because it's quiet, almost too quiet compared to what you're used to. But in that quiet, clarity begins to form. You can finally hear your own perception without it being drowned out. This clarity doesn't speak in dramatic thoughts or emotional extremes. It shows up as a clean sense of knowing, a grounded awareness of what actually matters in your experience right now. Decisions feel different when they aren't filtered through collective expectations. Emotional responses feel more authentic when they aren't shaped by borrowed fear. Even your sense of identity shifts when it's no longer constructed from the outside in. Over time, tuning out the collective field reveals that your mind was never meant to carry the weight of the world's narratives. When those narratives fall away, the mind recalibrates. It stops reacting to inherited stories and begins responding to the present moment. What remains is a form of mental clarity that feels like returning to something simple, natural, and deeply your own. When the mind stops filtering reality through layers of interpretation, something unexpected happens. Life becomes clearer, simpler, and far less reactive. Most people assume they experience the world directly, but what they actually encounter are the mind's predictions, conclusions, and emotional overlays. When these filters quiet down, the present moment reveals itself without distortion. The first change you notice is a shift in perception. Colors seem more vivid, not because anything outside changed, but because awareness is no longer obscured by mental commentary. Sounds feel richer, more textured. You begin to experience what is actually happening rather than what the mind insists it means. The world stops being interpreted and starts being seen. Emotion also behaves differently without thought filters. Normally, emotions are amplified or distorted by mental stories. A simple sensation becomes a narrative. A passing feeling becomes an identity. But when awareness meets emotion directly, without interpretation layered on top, the emotion moves cleanly. It rises, peaks, and passes without leaving residue. You discover that emotions are not problems, they only become problems when the mind adds meaning, judgment, or memory to them. Interactions with people change too. Without thought filters, you hear what someone is saying without projecting assumptions onto their words. You sense their tone without overlaying past experiences onto the moment. This clarity reduces unnecessary conflict and dissolves misunderstandings before they solidify. You respond from presence rather than defense, which changes the entire dynamic of conversations and relationships. Outcomes in your life start shifting because your actions become rooted in direct perception. Decisions are no longer made from fear, prediction, or inherited rules. They arise from what is actually needed or true in the moment. This creates a sense of alignment, not because you've manipulated circumstances, but because your responses match reality instead of an imagined version of it. Without the mind's filters, time also feels different. Moments that once felt rushed or crowded become more spacious. You're not living in past narratives or anticipating possible futures, you're here. This reduces the internal sense of urgency that usually drives behavior. Life unfolds in a smoother rhythm because you're no longer mentally resisting it. Reality becomes less argumentative. When you don't impose interpretations onto events, you don't experience friction between what is happening and what you believe should be happening. This doesn't mean passivity. It means you stop fighting situations mentally and begin responding to them directly. The absence of internal resistance creates an unusual sense of ease. Situations feel manageable because you're not adding anything unnecessary to them. Most importantly, when awareness observes life directly, a deeper intelligence becomes noticeable. It's not loud or dramatic. It's subtle, precise, and grounded. It guides perception and action in a way thinking rarely can. It moves without effort because it isn't constructing reality, it's meeting it. This intelligence isn't something you create, it's something that emerges when mental noise subsides. Experiencing reality without thought filters reveals a truth that feels both obvious and surprising. You were never meant to navigate life through constant interpretation. When the mind becomes quiet, reality stops being an argument and becomes something you can finally see, understand, and engage with as it truly is. Identity collapse begins quietly, almost imperceptibly, when the structures that once felt solid start showing their seams. For most of life, the phrase, "I am," has been followed by labels, roles, preferences, memories, and narratives. These attachments feel like the foundation of self, but when you observe them closely, they reveal themselves as thoughts, appearing, shifting, and dissolving just like any other mental event. The collapse happens when you finally see that none of these structures remain stable long enough to be who you are. You begin noticing that every identity you've held was learned. You absorbed ideas about who you should be from family, culture, peers, and the environments that shaped you. You internalized expectations about how to behave, what to value, and which paths were acceptable. These identity layers formed gradually, accumulating through repetition rather than conscious choice. Yet because they were reinforced by the world around you, they felt like truth. As awareness deepens, you see that these layers don't define you, they confine you. Each "I am" thought narrows perception. "I am anxious" pulls every experience through the filter of tension. "I am not good enough" turns neutral situations into evidence for inadequacy. "I am this kind of person" freezes you into patterns that may no longer reflect reality. The collapse begins when you recognize that these structures depend entirely on identification. Without your belief, they dissolve. The mind resists this at first. Identity gives it a sense of stability, even if that stability is built from limitation. Letting go feels like stepping into emptiness. But the emptiness is only the absence of the old narrative, not the absence of you. In that space, something subtler emerges. You notice that awareness remains present even when the identity dissolves. Thoughts collapse, roles fade, but the awareness observing them never disappears. This is the turning point. You see that awareness isn't something you do, it's what you are before the mind begins describing you. It doesn't rely on memory, belief, or personal history. It doesn't need validation or definition. It simply perceives. When this becomes clear, the old identity structures begin to lose their authority. They may still appear, but they no longer anchor your sense of self. As the collapse continues, life becomes less personal in the best possible way. Situations no longer revolve around defending or proving a story about who you think you are. Emotional reactions soften because they're not protecting an identity. Even preferences feel lighter, no longer framed as absolute truths but as momentary inclinations. You stop needing to be consistent with a past version of yourself and start responding from presence instead. The collapse doesn't destroy you, it releases you. It exposes how exhausting it was to maintain a constructed identity and how natural it feels to exist without one. In its absence, awareness-based identity emerges. It isn't rigid or defined. It's spacious, grounded, and effortless. You recognize yourself not as a collection of thoughts but as the clear, constant observer of them. When the old identity dissolves, what remains isn't emptiness, it's the quiet presence you've been all along. There is a distinct moment when life stops feeling like something you have to wrestle with. It doesn't arrive through effort or strategy. It appears quietly the instant identification dissolves and awareness becomes the primary way you meet the world. Before this shift, reality feels argumentative because every experience passes through layers of inherited patterns, fear, memory, beliefs, assumptions. These filters warp perception and create friction between what is happening and what the mind insists should be happening. The argument is never with life itself. It's with the mental structures interpreting it. When identification drops, the argument ends. Events unfold without being twisted into narratives. Emotion rises without resistance. Situations lose their sense of threat because they're no longer measured against a fragile identity. You stop reading neutrality as danger and uncertainty as failure. Reality becomes workable, coherent, and unexpectedly cooperative. What once felt like obstacles begin appearing as simple conditions to respond to. The internal tension you carried for years fades, not because the world changed, but because the lens through which you met it became clear. This clarity reveals something subtle: reality has always been responsive, but you were receiving distorted reflections of your own unconscious patterns. When the old identity collapses, those patterns lose their power. They no longer broadcast fear or rigidity into your environment. Instead, awareness becomes the signal. And awareness doesn't demand, interpret, or resist, it perceives. The world mirrors that perception back. Conversations smooth out. Decisions become simpler. Opportunities stop feeling blocked because you're no longer the one blocking them through internal contradiction. At the heart of this shift is coherence. Coherence means your internal state matches your perception of what is happening. Without identification, there is no conflict between inner and outer. You're not forcing the world to fit a narrative. You're allowing it to reveal itself. This alignment creates a sense of flow that feels almost surreal at first. You act without hesitation because the action arises from direct perception instead of mental prediction. The results often feel immediate because they're no longer filtered through doubt or inherited beliefs. This is the place where many people describe life feeling lighter, not easier, but less burdensome. You still navigate challenges, but they don't define you. You respond, adjust, and move without clinging. There is a calm intelligence guiding your choices, not from thought, but from awareness itself. You begin noticing that alignment brings its own form of support. Events synchronize. People show up at the right moments. Obstacles dissolve before turning into problems. It feels as if reality is working with you because, for the first time, you're not unconsciously working against it. And it's often at this exact moment, when someone feels reality soften without their effort, that they realize something profound is happening inside them. If you're experiencing this shift, if something in you is recognizing the end of internal resistance, this is the perfect moment to subscribe. It keeps you connected to this exploration and deepens the transformation you've already begun. When life stops arguing with you, it's not because the world changed. It's because you stopped arguing with yourself. Reality, finally, becomes clear enough to meet you exactly where you are.